This is exactly what so many people have been complaining about, saying that game developers are getting lazy and relying on DLSS, FSR, and XeSS, so upscaling, rather than actually optimizing their games. And this time we actually have the Remnant II devs just outright saying that. Now, this game first caught my attention because it's one of the first Unreal Engine 5 games to actually launch. And although it doesn't support the Lumen lighting system, which is one of the major new Unreal Engine 5 features, it does support Nanite, which is one of the other big Unreal Engine 5 features. Anyway, we're going to be seeing a whole bunch of new Unreal Engine 5 games, like it or not. I'm curious, is it going to solve stuttering issues, all that kind of thing? And at first, I was actually pretty happy to see that the game's system requirements didn't look that bad. I mentioned this in a news video, but then I had comments saying, hey, you can play this game with early access if you get the deluxe edition. It's looking like a lot of people are having some performance issues. And then that's when we hit this game developers flat out saying that upscaling is a necessity to play the game. That's crazy. But I did actually track it down in the discussion forums where they said game starting issues and performance increases. They basically say, we've heard from a few folks about the game's overall performance. We're definitely going to roll out performance updates after the game's launch, but for the sake of transparency, we designed the game with upscaling in mind, DLSS, FSR, and XeSS. So if you leave the upscaling settings as they are, you can hit reset defaults to get them back to normal. You should have the smoothest gameplay. You're free to tweak other settings for better performance. Changes to shadow settings will make the biggest difference besides upscaling. Still having trouble with the game's performance, blah, 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 reach out. Anyway, so I am absolutely about to now test this out, and I was looking at the game's system requirements to get an idea of where to start. Now, I don't have anything on this minimum specs list, but I do have a system with 16 gigabytes of RAM and an i5 9600K. So that's going to be a bit better than their minimum listed processor, but not as good as their recommended processor. And I do have an RTX 2060, which is a 6 gigabyte VRAM card. Should be interesting. So what we're going to do for the rest of this video is I'm going to pop in my 9600K system and an RTX 2060 with 16 gigabytes of RAM, see how this game does, and then we'll also try it out with a higher end CPU and some higher end GPUs and get a feel for how does this Unreal Engine 5 game perform? Is this a complete disaster, as statements like this seem to lead me to believe? Let's hop into the 2060 i5 9600K system and see how it's going. All right, I've done a ton of testing now, and you are seeing the footage behind me. This is the RTX 2060 on my i5 9600K system with 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3000 CL15 memory, and this is what the game defaulted to, although it defaulted to lock the frame rate at 60 FPS from I turned that off, but we're on DLSS performance, and it went to medium settings. So basically, the game defaults to extremely aggressive upscaling. So DLSS performance is rendering the game at 540p, and then using the DLSS upscaler, which is very good, to try to output a 1080p-like image, and it defaulted to medium settings. Now let's take a look at the overall performance. So what are you looking at right here? Pay special attention to the frame time graph. A video like this can't always convey when something is stuttery, but the frame time graph can. That is an extremely stuttery experience. It should be ideally you should get a flat line on a frame time graph with maybe a few little deviations here and there, very small. These are extreme stutters, which you can also see happening in the 1% lows. So this is the current frame rate. This is the average frame rate from the duration that I'm running the counter. And then this is the 1% lows from the duration that we're doing here. And again, 1% lows down in the 20s, extremely stuttery. So I started to look for, okay, what else can we test out here? One thing I decided to do was go down to just test out some other settings. So what about DLSS quality? Because I feel like DLSS performance at 1080p is just way too aggressive for my tastes. At DLSS quality, again, 1080p medium, DLSS quality, we're at 50 FPS-ish average, but the 1% lows are still in the teens, and I'm getting an extremely stuttery graph. However, let me pause this playback for a second and take a look at this. So what we want to do now is try to isolate what was the cause of the bad performance. Is it the GPU or is it more of the CPU, overall system that's causing the issue? And this right here tells me that there's likely at least some cause from the rest of the system. Although I was also wondering if it could be at all VRAM related. This is only a 6 gigabyte GPU, that kind of a thing. But why? What's this? So this is the GPU utilization percentage. And normally if you're limited by the GPU and not the rest of the system in some way, you would usually see that around 98 and 99% solidly while you're gaming. When it dips well below that, like here we're seeing it dip into the 80s, oftentimes what that's saying is the GPU is having to wait for some other element in the system. So again, let me play this a little bit more. And we'll see, I guess I'm gonna change settings here, but keep your eye on that as we go. Also, we do have VRAM allocation, which doesn't seem to be going over 6 gigabytes, but it can sometimes be hard to tell just by what it's reporting. Here, I'm turning the upscaling off. So we're now looking at native 1080p medium. And here, again, we're kind of actually averaging the mid-30s now, although the 1% lows are still bad and there's a lot of spikes. And we'll see that on the GPU percentage, it kind of was bouncing a little bit low at times to around 90. So it's still suspicious that there's something weird going on there. But now I'm also trying out, okay, what if we just go to low settings? So this is low settings, native 1080p. And it looks like even at low settings on this system, we're in the mid 40s. We're not getting 60 FPS, even going down to low settings at native 1080p. It's still spiky at low settings. I was wondering if this could be VRAM related, which is one of the things that I was testing by going down as low as we possibly could, because usually that will reduce VRAM usage. Now I'm kicking on DLSS performance mode again at low settings. So this is basically as low as we can set things in the graphics menu. So we're gonna be rendering about 540p at low settings. And here we go. So now we are seeing, again, we're not always seeing the GPU maxed out, so we could be hitting some CPU limitations. We're getting the spiky frame time graph, although it's a lot smoother than it was. Again, we go through a bit of a smoother stretch on the frame time graph here, get some spikes right there. Now, when you're seeing the spiky frame time graph, it can also be a shader cache issue. The first time you see something in a game, it can cause spikes if the game didn't properly precompile shaders or all of the shaders. But we've been in this scene long enough that this isn't feeling like shader spikes anymore. That is feeling like it's just really stuttery. So yeah, at this point, there's nothing else I could do to lower the burden on the system. The VRAM is only reporting 4.5 gigabytes of allocation and under 4 gigabytes of actual usage, so it didn't seem to be entirely VRAM related, at least. But again, we're not seeing the GPU always pegged at a full 98, 99%. So something seemed weird here. So we're gonna do a couple of things. One is we're gonna put a more powerful GPU with more VRAM into this system to see how it does. And then we'll also try putting the 2060 into a higher end CPU based system and see how that performs. So this next video I just cut over to here is my RTX 3060 in the same 9600K based platform. Let's take a look here. So the 3060 is gonna be a stronger GPU. It also has 12 gigabytes of VRAM, so that should no longer be an issue. It defaulted to the same settings, medium settings with DLSS performance at 1080p. Once again, that is extremely aggressive upscaling, but let's start by testing what the game defaulted to. And again, we want to pay special attention to the frame time graph. I will say that while it is still a bit spiky here, it is a lot smoother than what we were seeing at these same settings on the 2060. However, as I turn this corner, we're getting a few more spikes. Again, that could be shader compilation. It could be traversal stutters. Unreal Engine 4 was known for all of those being big issues. I was hoping Unreal Engine 5, would maybe do better. Here we're getting a pretty smooth section on the frame time graph and then a few more spikes, the 1% lows. Again, more spikes again. So this has certainly not solved all of the problems, although it does seem to be performing better than what we saw on the 2060. But again, still getting some definite spikes and all of that. VRAM-wise, at these settings, it's looking like we're around 5.5, a little bit, very close to 6 gigabytes of allocation, around 5 gigabytes of actual usage. So it's possible that at these settings, when you get close to the 6 gigabytes of VRAM we had on the 2060, the actual system reserves some of that as well. It is possible that having the extra VRAM here is smoothing out at least some of the stutters, but again, not all of the stutters are gone. So at this point, I think I went around and just tried out some other graphics settings. So the next thing I did was turn off DLSS. So turning off DLSS, we're now just at 1080p native medium settings. And we're getting, in the 40s, and it's very stuttery again now, which it's can't be a VRAM issue because we're not spilling anywhere. We're not even past 6 gigabytes of VRAM usage, and this is a 12 gigabyte card, so this can't be the VRAM causing it. So, but I was like, wow, did turning off DLSS really make it that much more stuttery? So I turned DLSS performance back on, and sure enough, we're a lot less stuttery again. So somehow having DLSS on does seem to be helping reduce how stuttery that is, although there were still a few stutters. And again, I wanted to kind of A/B test that once again, so I kicked off DLSS, was just wondering what was going on here. I was also curious, what if we went down to low settings? Is there something about the medium settings that are just too much for my system? So we're now looking at DLSS off, 1080p low on the RTX 2060. And here we're once again getting a lot more stutters when I have DLSS off. Again, we're nowhere near the limit of my of the VRAM capacity. But once again, if we watch the GPU utilization, right there, it popped down to 68, 75, 77, 60, 68, 85, 81. It's weird. So, but then back up to 97 again, 91. So there's something weird going on there. It does feel like there's a bottleneck somewhere in this system. And that's what I wanted to look at next is, okay, what if I take my 2060 and put it into a higher end PC? Does that smooth out all of the frame rate issues? So the footage you're about to see here, what happened, there's more CPU cores. This is now an 8-core, 16-thread system. This is the 7800X3D with 32 gigabytes of DDR5 CL30 memory. If you don't know what any of that means, what it basically means is we're now on about the highest end gaming CPU and memory system that you can set up. But we have the RTX 2060 in it. We're back to the game's default settings. This is DLSS performance. At the medium settings, 1080p, and once again, this is the game's, this is now the high-end system with the RTX 2060, not 3060 that we started the video with. So now, because I have so many more CPU cores, the frame time graph is down here, but notice it is way smoother than what we saw originally with the 2060. We're in the mid-60s average FPS, but now the 1% lows are in the mid-50s. So this, and notice that the GPU is now pegged at 99%, and we're not dropping from that. So this seems to be confirmation that the issue was not the 2060 causing all those frame time spikes. It did seem to be the underlying platform. So now remember, if we look back at the system requirements, I'm on a 9600K. That is above the 7600 minimum, but that is below the 10600K recommended. So I would say that the CPU recommendations certainly seem to be no joke here. It did seem to be causing me a lot of problems to be on the 9600K, which is not good to see for a lot of people's systems, right? So anyway, now that we're not limited by the rest of the platform, I decided to just test out what the 2060 is capable of if it's on a CPU that's able to keep up with it. So this is 1080p medium settings with no upscaling now. So it's looking like the RTX 2060 at 1080p medium gets you in the mid-30s. It does not look like we're having VRAM spillover issues. It looks like we're allocating about 5 gigabytes and using a little bit right around 4 gigabytes of VRAM. So it looks like 1080p medium does fit easily into our 6 gigabyte buffer. We're not getting the frame time spikes, but the overall performance is just quite bad. They weren't kidding when they said they were relying on upscaling. So I went, okay, if I don't want to upscale, if I go all the way down to low settings, so this is the 2060 at 1080p low settings if we don't upscale. So you actually want to play at native 1080p. We did see a few spikes right here, I think, as it's just kind of loading in the new assets at the low settings. So if we give that a minute to settle out, I think when I get to the bottom of this ladder, I think I restart the frame rate counter. Yeah, so I reset the frame rate counter now that it seems like I think things have had a chance to load in. We're now averaging kind of in the mid 40s. Again, the GPU's locked in without issues. So yeah, it looks like even at low settings, so if you don't want to upscale, an RTX 2060 is not capable of 60 FPS at 1080p low. You're down in the mid 40s, which isn't great. So when they said that they are relying on, devs say that they made the game with upscaling in mind, DLSS, FSR, XeSS, a necessity for smooth gameplay. I mean, I don't think they were kidding. Their recommended GPU for the game, remember this is the recommended GPU for the game, gets you in the mid 40s at 1080p low, if you're not using upscaling. So I was, again, just curious to test things out a little bit more. So I did go ahead and kick on some upscaling. So we're back to DLSS, but I'm trying DLSS quality. So less of an aggressive upscale. We're still at low settings. So it's looking like at 1080p low DLSS quality, you're now able to get around 60 FPS, again, if the rest of your system can keep up with it. So the recommended GPU for the game requires upscaling at low settings 1080p in order to hit 60 FPS. And yeah, I wasn't super happy to see that, but at least, it's not DLSS performance mode. Anyway, so I was done testing the 2060 at this point, and I wanted to look at some other GPUs. And again, at this point, I wasn't going to go back to my 9600K base system because it's not going to tell us much about the GPUs if we're just CPU limited causing stutters. So at this point, I decided, you know what, the 4060s, the recent 60 class GPU, I already looked at the 2060 and the 3060, it might be interesting to look at the 4060. So this is the 4060. The game defaulted to DLSS performance medium settings again. So it wanted the same default. So this is the RTX 4060, 1080p, medium settings DLSS performance. On this fast CPU-based system, we're not seeing any stutters, and we are around the mid 90 FPS range at these settings. But again, this is DLSS performance at medium settings 1080p. So this is 540p upscaled to 1080p at medium settings. So I definitely wanted to try out some other settings before we left. So here, I turned off the upscaling. So I wanted to look at 1080p medium. So 1080p medium looks like the RTX 4060, brand new 60 class GPU, came out right before this game did, is not capable of 60 FPS 1080p medium in this game. Okay? Right? We're right around 50 FPS. So without upscaling, 1080p medium on the brand new RTX 4060 is not going to get you 60 FPS in this game, which quite frankly, I think it says something both about this game and about the RTX 4060. Later we'll look at what does it take to get 60 FPS 1080p medium. But anyway, here we're looking at low settings. So 1080p low settings, you actually are able to get around 60 FPS on the 4060 if you have a CPU that can keep up. So yeah. So the brand new RTX 4060 is a 1080p low 60 FPS GPU in this game, which again, I think says something both about this game and about the 4060. Now here I tried out frame generation to see what would happen. So this is DLSS 3 frame generation, but then I noticed something weird. It seemed to just lock to 60 FPS. So I looked back at the settings, and when I turned on frame generation, it turned the frame rate lock back to 60 FPS right there, okay? It locks the frame. So now I tried to unlock it again. I turn on the frame generation, and it locks to 60 FPS again. Now, bear in mind that I'm recording this through a capture card, which is a 60 FPS capture card. So I think what the game is doing is, for whatever reason, when you turn on frame generation, it turns a frame rate cap back on to your monitor's maximum refresh rate. And so my capture card, since it's a 60 FPS capture card, it's being detected as a 60 FPS monitor. And so it's just locking the game when I turn on frame generation. So anyway, the game does support frame generation, but apparently I can't show you its performance unlocked on this setup. So here we're getting in the low 40s. I actually was listening to myself talk apparently rather than look at what settings you were. Okay, so yeah, so we're looking at high settings 1080p. So high settings 1080p on the RTX 4060. Looks like we're down in the low 40 range. And again, that's if we don't want to upscale. So again, not great performance here on the 4060 1080p high. Again, I think it tried to kick on that frame rate cap again. I made sure to turn that off. Okay, so here we're at 1080p Ultra, and I'm double checking the frame rate cap is off here. That's why I popped back in there. Okay, so 1080p Ultra on the RTX 4060 is going to not be the most amazing experience in the world. It looks like we are down in the 30s. Yeah, so kind of a mid-low 30 range on the RTX 4060 1080p Ultra. So this game is incredibly demanding on the GPU when you're not upscaling. So I think the last thing I tested out here was playing around a little bit more with upscaling, that kind of stuff. So I think I looked at if we wanted to play at ultra settings 1080p, what kind of DLSS would be required. So DLSS quality ultra settings, and I think we do get around 60 FPS, but it's a little bit below it. Yeah, so we're right around 60 FPS. It's certainly not a lock. The 1% lows are certainly below it. The averages can dip a little bit below it. But DLSS quality 1080p Ultra does seem to get around 60 FPS on the RTX 4060. So yeah, this seems to be how the developers intended it though. They want you to stick at pretty high settings and use upscaling, which is certainly an option, but I just hate relying on that to get decent frame rates on brand new, 60 class GPU. Anyway, so I was just kind of randomly kicking some things on here. At this point, I was pretty much done with the 4060, and I was curious if an RTX 3080, so I put in a 3080, and I was curious if a 3080 could hit 1080p Ultra in this game. So 1080p, Ultra settings, no upscaling on the RTX 3080. Check this out, guys. We're averaging right around 60 FPS. So if you want 1080p Ultra in this game with no upscaling, you need an RTX 3080 class performance, which is absolutely brutal. So I do go ahead and also then check out 1440p. So at 1440p, we're gonna look at no upscaling, ultra settings. So 1440p Ultra, can an RTX 3080 handle it? Well, that depends on if you feel like upper 30s, low 40s is handling it. Yes, the RTX 3080, by the way, I have the 3080 12 gigabyte. Currently, the VRAM is not gonna really matter here, but the 12 gigabyte version does have a few more CUDA cores, a little more memory bandwidth. So this is a little stronger than the baseline 3080, but it shouldn't be much different. Here I decided, okay, I guess we'll need to kick on some DLSS. So we go to DLSS quality at ultra settings 1440p. So, here we go, RTX 3080, 1440p Ultra DLSS quality. Now granted, I think DLSS quality at 1440p does look pretty good. This is a reasonable way to play a game. but I hate having to rely on it, and now we're at kind of mid 70 range. So yeah, this game does respond really well to upscaling. But again, I just hate that there's not more scalability in the graphic settings themselves without having to rely on the upscaling. By the way, it doesn't seem like there's any like ray tracing going on or anything like that. There's no ray traced settings listed. So now we're at medium settings. So this is medium settings with DLSS quality on the RTX 3080. Looks like we're up in the 90 or so FPS range. So if you want to be around the 90 FPS range for responsiveness, you can go 1440p medium, DLSS quality, and get a pretty responsive game. Again, it's an RTX 3080, so it is a very strong GPU. Here, I turned off upscaling, so now we're at 1440p medium settings, and the RTX 3080 does not lock 60 FPS at 1440p medium. And here's where I mean that, like, I want more scalability in their normal settings beyond just using upscaling. I think it's kind of disappointing that the 3080 wouldn't hit us at, 60 FPS at 1440p medium. And then I also tested out my RTX 4090. At this point, I was just like, okay, is even a 4090 safe in this game? So check this out. 1440p Ultra. What does it take to get over 60 FPS at 1440p Ultra in this game? Does it take an RTX 4090? It kind of looks like it, yeah. Check it out. Around 70 FPS, 71, 72 FPS on an RTX 4090 at 1440p Ultra in this game, if you're not upscaling. That... I mean, we knew that, Unreal Engine 5 games could be getting pretty demanding. Well, I would say this qualifies as pretty demanding. So yeah, if you do kick on DLSS quality, on the RTX 4090 at 1440p, you do get a massive performance boost. So this game does respond extremely well to upscaling. We're now over 120 FPS now. But again, I just hate the fact that it kind of requires upscaling to get a decent performance boost. Again, without upscaling, we were around 70 FPS on a 4090 at 1440p Ultra, which just like, I don't know, just feels wrong to me, but that is what we were getting. So I also wanted to test out 4K resolution, because a 4090 is definitely usually a 4K GPU. Okay, did I actually lose my footage here? Do I not have... Guys, I think I lost my... No, wait, here we go. I guess the game just blanked out for a minute while it was adjusting resolutions. That's all that happened. Okay, so on the 4090 at 4K Ultra, the 4090 is around 41, 42, 40 FPS here. So RTX 4090 4K Ultra in this game is around 40 FPS. That's about the same thing I get at like RT Ultra in Cyberpunk without upscaling, if you want some kind of comparison. So kicking on DLSS quality though, again, the game does respond a lot better than some games do to upscaling. So it does seem like the devs actually did mean that when they said that, but like, okay, we're in the 70s now, which is certainly playable and everything, but a 4090 does absolutely require upscaling to play at ultra settings 4K, which I think is a little bit disappointing to say to say the least here. Now I tried kicking on frame gen again, but once again, it did the 60 FPS lock thing again. So that wasn't very useful. It was still doing that. I don't know why I thought maybe it wouldn't. But yeah, it was still locking to my monitor's refresh rate when I tried kicking on frame gen, so I couldn't show you what that would do. So I tried a little more aggressive DLSS. So this is DLSS performance on the RTX 4090 at 4K Ultra. And we're now getting close to 100 FPS. Now keep in mind that DLSS performance is an internal resolution of 1080p. So this is 1080p upscaled to 4K, and we're getting around 100 FPS, which is, certainly very playable, not mind-blowing performance considering it's a upscale from 1080p. And this gave me the funny idea of actually looking at, How, what does the 4090 actually do at 1080p? So the screen's blanking out for a second while it updates to the 1080p resolution. So the RTX 4090, apparently it didn't accept the I was confused at first. Okay, it didn't take the 1080p monitor resolution change, I guess. So okay, we're having some issues adjusting resolution. Here we go. Now we actually got locked in. So we're at 1080p Ultra on an RTX 4090. And it looks like we are around 120-ish FPS. And it does not look like we're CPU limited because the GPU is still hanging out around 98%. So yeah, if you want to get well over 100 FPS at 1080p Ultra in this game, it does look like you need an RTX 4090. So the 4090 is a high refresh rate 1080p GPU in this game. So, final thoughts on this. When the devs say that they designed the game with upscaling in mind to get smooth gameplay, I guess they weren't kidding, and I don't think that's a good thing. I mean, it is true that the game does respond really well to upscaling because some games, kicking on DLSS quality might only get you like a 15 or 20% performance gain, but here we were seeing a lot better than that in terms of the boost we got from upscaling. But I hated the fact that turning down the normal graphics settings did not seem to give us enough scalability. Which was really not great here. Now, I wanted to test out more GPUs, but honestly, I ran out of time and this video is getting super long anyway. Looks like there were reports from the game devs that ARC A750 graphics cards were having some issues. Although I will say that I just noticed this morning that it looks like Intel did launch a new beta graphics driver that does report Remnant II fixed issue may exhibit texture corruption during gameplay, so it's looking like that's reported as a fixed issue in the Intel Arc driver, but frankly, I'm just out of time to actually test that out myself, and I know tons of you are going to be very disappointed I did not test out any AMD GPUs in this video. But again, my original plan was to go back through all the low, mid, high range AMD GPUs as well. But like I said, I am just out of time for both the length of the video and my time making the video. So sorry I didn't get to the AMD GPUs here. But overall, I think my biggest takeaway was, I don't know why it hated my 9600K based system so much, but it certainly seemed to. It was a stuttery mess no matter what we seemed to do. So yeah, the CPU side of things here does seem to be a bit concerning for me. And like I said, the 2060, that's their recommended GPU, but it was only getting 60 FPS if you went to like low settings DLSS quality. It could not hit 60 FPS at native 1080p on the recommended GPU. You had to upscale to hit it, even at low settings. What do you guys think? Have you guys tried this out? I think the game officially launches for everybody today. I was able to test it early yesterday because if you buy the deluxe edition for an extra like $20, you get some early access to the game or something like that. And I wanted to get the video ready for you guys, so I went ahead and did that. Anyway, this video is really long. We're hitting 30 minutes here, so I better just stop. Huge thank you to people who watched the end of the video. Thank you to subscribers, viewers, and channel members who hit the join button to financially support the channel directly, which allows me to do things like waste money on the deluxe version of this game to get you guys the footage out early. Anyway, hope this was useful. I would say if you're not on a good CPU system, I would maybe steer clear of this game, and also if you're not comfortable with upscaling really aggressively, maybe wait and see if the devs do get some more performance patches out there. If you have a high enough end system, maybe, the game itself, I didn't play super far into the game, but the overall gameplay I wasn't having issues with. It seemed, kind of fun. I can't give you a full review at this point or anything. Anyway, I better just shut up and end the video. I hope all of you have an excellent day.